Hey everyone, welcome to Business Unchained, where entrepreneurs and business owners come together to power up on their journey to greatness.
Bobby Masha is the founder and CEO of Greenridge Wealth Planning. All opinions expressed by Bobby and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of Greenridge Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any financial decisions. Clients of Greenridge Wealth Planning may maintain positions in any securities discussed in this podcast.
Today, we have an interesting gentleman whose emotional story is what propelled him into business. He is the co-founder and CEO of Alpha Fit Club. It's a interval-style gym class that has 13 locations that he's developed into a franchise model that I actually go to. We didn't even know that's not even how this got set up, ironically enough. But he's also co-founder of Garage Gym and a fitness coach on Ladder app. This CEO athlete has competed in everything from Ironmans to Hydrox World Championship. 1 kilometer run, 100 meters sandbag lunges, 1 kilometer run, and 175 rep wall balls. Our guest, Sam Tooley.
Names are important.
I love having these meetings with entrepreneurs because it gives us a little bit of an insight into your life and some of the struggles that you've gone through and how you've come around and turned them into successes, which you've obviously done. So what I'm hoping for, and I'd love to, I want to hear what you're hoping to learn here too, is I have a top 2 hit list today. I want to talk a little bit about your emotional story that led you to where you are today. I think that we all go through some various levels of shit in our lives, and it's really, what we do to preserve that makes a difference. So I'd love to hear your story. And then I also would like to talk a little bit about your now franchisor and the path that you went through to get there, the decision that you had made to say, this is the direction I want to take the business in, and also some of the processes that you went through to get there.
Sure.
What else you want to talk about?
I mean, honestly, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm sure we'll hear. It's been a crazy ride, right? And it's really only been 6-7 years to do it, which sounds really long as I say it out loud. It's gone incredibly quick. But honestly, just, I'm excited to walk through it. I feel like every time I go through it and talk about it with someone who also understands what it actually means to be an entrepreneur. It's one thing to tell the story or have a conversation with somebody who hasn't had those trials and tribulations, hasn't had those moments of doubt, questioning whether or not it's worth it, making the commitment to follow through, all of those things. And that's not to diminish anybody who's in a 9-to-5 job or, works for somebody else, but it's a very different conversation in terms of insights that even I get from going through these conversations with other people. So it's always fun to kind of just deep dive on it and jam.
Well, I think one of the things that is really I'm hoping to do is inspire some people who have found themselves as businessmen, entrepreneurs, women who are saying, I'm stuck. I'm stuck in a rut. I started this thing. I don't really know what to do in terms of run a business. I don't know how to grow it. I don't really have an exit strategy or a vision for this thing. And, start to get them a little bit more aware on what they need to do to grow their business and target and focus on their lifestyle and focus on their mindfulness and everything that comes to building a successful business and family.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start, dude?
Probably best to rewind the clock in terms of how it all began and kind of just trend our way through it, because I think there's a lot to get more specific on as we go through that. So
should we start at the also ironic situation of you going to college with my sister, which I found out 2 days ago?
Yeah. Which I got kicked out of Fairfield U my junior year and weaseled my way back in. So that's why I was saying I was definitely a different beast back in college. Always very entrepreneurial. Started Stag's Laundry at Fairfield U with my roommate, where we partnered with a cleaning service that picked up kids' laundry, cleaned it, folded it, brought it back to them.
So that's the mascot for Fairfield, is
yes.
Stag, just for people who are listening.
For full context, which was great. It was cool. I mean, my mom literally made like our first poster that we stood with at orientation, dressed up in a little suit. Definitely the most put together I was during that college stint. I also was a cross-country runner in college at Fairfield U for all of a year before they very politely asked me to not rejoin the team. So I had different priorities. I was having a good time, enjoying myself, wanted to make money. So it was really more focused on doing that, having a good time and making money, than I was getting an education, quite frankly. But I knew very early in that process that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Even when I came back home, I rented a fleet of Italian ice trucks and moved into my own apartment at 19 years old and had kids younger than me driving the trucks on routes that I designed, coming back with wads of cash to me in my apartment. And
Wait. So what?
yeah. So it's everything.
What influenced you?
Honestly, Fairfield U itself is a really expensive school with a lot of kids who had a lot of money, and I didn't, right? I grew up in Westfield. We did really I had a very comfortable life, but there was just a certain caliber of lifestyle at Fairfield that I didn't have. So even when I was like a junior in college, I would go sweep the floors at a dump at 4 a.m. just to make $30 so that I had money to go out at night. So there was always this process of just wanting to make money. And again, I just wasn't interested in the school aspect of things. So I always felt like I needed something to feel productive. Like I was kind of pulling my weight. So for me, that was working, and that was the gym. So realistically, looking back on it, like college was the catalyst of me recognizing that I probably wasn't meant to sit in a room and follow a script or a playbook, but rather go make my own. And it took a lot of reflection to realize that that's how I was moving in college. But at the time, it was kind of just like, that seems interesting, I'm going to go try it. So I always had a willingness to kind of put myself out there and do what was not probably the norm, even at Fairfield.
So junior year,
yep,
you're out.
I'm out and back in. So work my magic.
Within what period of time?
Came home. I was actually living up at Fairfield in the summer. Fairfield's on the beach, for those of you who don't know. So I was enjoying myself up there. I was a garbage man. I was flying around on the back of the trucks. I thought it was going to be sick. I was like sending on Snapchat at the time videos of me on the back of the truck to my buddies. And I'm like, yo, this is amazing. 1 week in, I was like, this is not sick. It's 90 degrees out. I'm like hucking like frozen lasagnas into the dumpster.
You
whatever.
Never watched Men at Work?
Yeah, no.
With Charlie Sheen and I think Emilio Estevez.
Probably before your time. Yeah.
It was about them being garbage men.
Yeah, it wasn't cool. It wasn't what I imagined. But I was doing that, and I had the laundry company. So I had a FedEx package overnighted to my house back at home in Westfield. And my mom said, hey, you've got a package. Do you want me to open it? Thank God. I was like, no, I'll grab it when I get home. I thought it was like a flyer that the school wanted me to approve for this upcoming year. And it was actually a letter saying that you've been academically released from the university. So 2 weeks later, I come home, open this up, heart goes down into my chest or into my stomach. And I just was like, what the hell am I going to do? Am I going to tell my parents? What am I going to do? So I called the dean, who I unfortunately had too good of a relationship with. I emailed her, came up back to Fairfield, sat with her, and told her kind of what I was actually going through, which there was a lot that kind of led me through high school into college, definitely impacted me beyond college, but similar to kind of having what maybe on the outside looking in looked to be a really comfortable lifestyle, what have you, at home. My home was really broken. So dealt with addiction in the family, dealt with my parents getting divorced while I was in college. So I was a really angry kid as well. And I say kid in high school because realistically, we're still kids in high school and even in college, quite frankly.
I'm 45. I still feel like a
kid. I listen, I'd call you kid when I walk in here. I'd be like, what's up, kid? So I'm feeling the same way, but just was really angry. And so I was able to, during high school, take it out on track and field, right? Track and field, I was a pretty strong athlete, state champion, school record holder at Westfield, went on to run Division I at Fairfield for a little bit.
Did you realize that at the time that you were redirecting your frustration, your anger, your anxiety into that sport?
100%. I mean, I used the track as my punching bag. My coach was a really military, he had a military background, and he would pull me aside. He's 75 years old, and he was like, you're the angriest runner I've ever seen. And I get almost emotional as I play that conversation back, because there was just so much pent up frustration about kind of the cards that I felt like I was dealt, the situation that I felt like I was living in, the fact that I couldn't get away from it either. And so when I went to college and I started to have this freedom and this flexibility, I kind of redirected that outlet to having a good time and partying. And it eventually went from being a want. I wanted to have a good time. I was enjoying myself. It was, awesome. College is awesome if you're having a good time. And eventually it became a need. And so it went from, enjoying myself each and every day to really more so needing to have that outlet, needing to have that drink, needing to kind of wanting to almost fast forward through my days. And eventually that led to me not going to class, getting academically released from the university, figuring out a way to get back in. By the time I was done with college, my time there, I was a 5th year super senior living with all of my buddies who were like valedictorian of the school, you know, getting their masters in accounting. Like it was still a great group of dudes, but they were all on their way. And I was kind of just there sulking and probably digging myself into a little bit of a deeper hole.
So it's amazing that you focused it toward track and field, because you said you came from a home also of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Did you deal with any of those struggles, or did any of that ever pop up in your life? Or
So by the time I was that 5th year super senior, and I dealt with my senior year, the best way that I can ever describe it to somebody is that I could tell that I was just off, right? I went from being a really a go-getter, right? Here I was pouring myself into track, winning state championships, had a great friend group, all Division I athletes, getting into a great college, starting businesses, you name it, right? And everybody was always like applauding me, saying like, keep going, do your thing. I went from that to feeling like a shell of myself. And so the only way that I could really cope with it, or at least that I recognized I could cope with it, was just by drinking and having a good time, or so, you know, supposedly. So by the time I was a 5th year senior, I was just so broken and I felt so lost, so hopeless. I was like, am I ever going to feel normal again? And there was a moment where my grandparents came to visit me, and they could tell, my grandparents I'm super close with, they could tell something was off. And they actually came to speak with me about one of my family members. And they were like, we're going to try and get them help. And angry Sam was just like, where have you been? Like, this has been going on for years, but okay, sounds good. I used it as my excuse to come home. I used it as my excuse to get away from college, to come home, to take care of my brother, to do my thing. Well, my family member finally got the help that they needed. When we went to go visit that family member, and I have no problem saying this, it was my mom. We went to go visit her in rehab. Really weird if you actually think about going to visit somebody that you love in that environment, especially if you're not familiar with it. And we did an intervention, got her the help that she needed, got her a place where she needed to be. And I'm sitting there in a room with someone sharing their story. And for the first time ever, somebody who's actually gone through the process of recovering and getting into recovery, articulating what it feels like to deal with that issue. I went there from my foot tapping on the floor to my stomach turning to my heart pumping to the fact that I had to literally remove myself from the room, go outside and regroup. And I asked myself if I was overreacting. And I wasn't answering the question the right way. So I went back into the woman who spoke and I said, am I overreacting, or are you actually articulating what I've been dealing with for the last however long? Sat with her for an hour. And she looked at me by the end of that conversation and she said, if you leave this place, it will be the biggest mistake of your life.
She was one of the members that was sharing, or
she was actually she went on to become a professor, and now basically was a therapist helping individuals at this rehab facility. But she was sharing her story because she had overcome her addiction. So she talked about that hopelessness, that loss, that feeling of being a shell of yourself. And here I was expecting to now understand what my mom had been going through. It was actually what I had been going through too. So that weekend, I decided to check myself into rehab, and I was in rehab with my mom, which is like, it's like out of a movie, right? It's almost hard to believe the story. But I was 23 years old and checked myself into rehab to finally, what I now can go back and articulate, I finally was able to take ownership over my life and take responsibility for my actions, the outcomes of them, and just say, I'm done blaming everybody else, blaming my circumstances, blaming whatever, and I'm going to do something for myself to put myself in a better situation.
For you, and going through that scenario, I mean, you walk in to support somebody else and all of a sudden finding yourself being supported. And then it sounds like the veil was lifted of something you've been dealing with for some years now. How long did it take you to really regroup your mindset and feel like you're almost fulfilled or completed, or you don't feel as empty? What was that process for you?
I can say that the initial few days that I was there was incredibly scary. They actually placed me at 23-year-olds with a group of 45-year-old men because I was one of the only people who actually volunteered to be there. The other 23-year-old kids were like placed there, by their parents. So there was a feeling of almost like lack of security. You know, my roommate was somebody who had overdosed multiple times and almost passed away on heroin, right? And so here I was, like this preppy kid from Fairfield University, 23 years old, no tattoos, no nothing, didn't look the part. And these guys are like, who the hell is this kid in here? And you are almost a little bit scared. You're like, am I supposed to be here? And like, there's no getting out. You're just there. And as I went through that process, I would say very quickly, I was relieved. I was like, I am in the right place. This was supposed to happen. Those were just through conversations I was having. And then the craziest part for me is I always saw myself as a leader, right? Whether I was on the track team, my friend group, my family, you name it. I always saw myself as that. And I think that's where there was a gap, a disconnect between who I was becoming. But here I am with these 45-year-old men, 23 years old. I started leading this group, right? Because I was just like, wake up. Like, do you realize where we are and what we're dealing with here? One of the gentlemen that was in our group left. He kind of graduated, quote unquote, the process, and passed away. Like 1 week we were there, right? Overdosed and passed away. And it was just like this like moment of awakening for me, where I'm just like, you need to take this shit seriously. And I had seen it in my family. I'd watched my mom struggle with this. I'd watched other family members struggle with this. I didn't want my life to end up the way that I had seen so many other people's. So very quickly through that process, I spent 30 days there. I was just like, this was the right decision. I'm going to make a change and I'm going to make this stick. The next 60 days, I went to a sober living house in Pennsylvania. So I did a 90-day kind of stint. That was with kind of kids more my age, right? 18 to 25 years old. Got a job, started working, started doing my thing, kind of re-entering the world, if you will. And again, led that group. And it wasn't like a force, right? I wasn't forcing myself to lead. It just was happening really naturally. I would wake up, I would meditate, I would do the yoga, I would go work out, I'd get other kids to do it with me. I'd read the books. I was like, I'm just going to kind of set course for who I want to be and then try to match how I'm living in alignment with that, which is so much of how I live my life now. I felt like that process was the foundation of a mindset that I would eventually need way more than I ever knew, because life kept throwing punches my way. But without going through that process, there's absolutely 0% chance I'm sitting here having this conversation.
It sounds like a huge learning curve of maturity. It seems almost like you were doing your own thing off your path, so to speak. And this really kind of brought you home.
Yeah, it was just I was always mature because I had to be, right? I was always taking care of myself, taking care of my family, but in a very narrow window, right? I was good at leading other people, but not myself, right? I wasn't like walking the walk in a real way. You know, when you're telling other people they should do this, they should do that, but you're not actually doing it yourself behind closed doors, right? And I think that was the gap that I needed to solve for. So when you start walking the walk yourself, I think that, makes everything come to life a little bit more.
So you felt like a little bit of a hypocrite, like you needed to correct that.
I was so naive to it, right? I don't even think I knew that I was being a hypocrite, but then once the lights shine on it and you just start to be honest with yourself and ask yourself really hard questions, and you're true in your answers, yeah, very quickly I definitely was being a massive hypocrite.
So, and I mean, everything is perspective, right? So when I think about a story like that, and I think about your mom going through this, for you to have identified that at 23, that's amazing. I mean, amazing that you came out of it. I know a lot of guys who have been through the same situation. Some of them have gotten out of it and some of them haven't. What do you think was the guiding light that kept you moving forward instead of stutter stepping back? Or did you have any stutter steps back?
I didn't have any stutter steps back. I think it was the question of, like, quite frankly, it was my mom as well, right? So she made this choice, she made this transformation, she made this commitment to our family to make an adjustment. And who was I always kind of think, who am I to quit on this if she's willing to do it, right? It's probably even harder for her than it is for me. And yet she's willing. And so I had so much support that it felt so selfish to deviate from anything that I had said I was going to go do. And I just think when you make that actual commitment and really mean it, right? Not just say like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym for the next 30 days, right? And then like 2 weeks in, life gets busy, you don't do it, right? And I apologize in advance for how many gym analogies I'll probably give here during this conversation, but it's just easy for me. When you really mean it, and you say like, I'm not going to let anything get in my way, it's just super powerful.
That must have changed your relationship with your mom, no?
It did. It gave me a much more empathetic understanding of where she had been, what she had been dealing with, what have you. And it certainly brought us incredibly close. I think moms have a way of seeing through your bullshit, right? And so she probably knew I needed to make an adjustment way before I did. But again,
she was dealing with her own thing, and
totally.
you guys kind of came together with this.
Yeah.
So now you're out and you're ready to take on the world, so to speak. Talk to me a little bit. Let's keep going down that path of getting to today.
Yeah. So I think to one of the points that I made there, in that little did I know I would need this foundation of a mindset. So fast forward, again, super supported. Everybody had my back. They're like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you actually want to do? Right. I think you can feel obligated to go back to school, to get a job, a real job, quote unquote. My dad was like, what do you actually want to do? And a lot of this came to a shock to my dad specifically. So when I ended up moving back home, and the answer to the question was I wanted to coach. Again, as I was going through that process and I was leading that group of men, leading that group at the Sober Living House, I actually wrote a letter to my track coach and I said, this is what I'm dealing with. I said, I want to get back to training. Would you write me a training program? So I was like literally running laps in this field outside of this house in Pennsylvania. And he related to what I was going through. He dealt with something similar in his family. So brought me really close there. And I said, I want to coach. I said, I want to come home. And I know that if I'm going to walk the walk, right, and be the person that I want to be, I need to just get back in that environment. That's where I was my best, whether it was my outlet, whether it was my teammates, whether it was how I set goals or what have you.
So it sounds like you're still trying to figure it out.
Definitely. I mean, listen, I'm still trying to figure it out, right? 100%. But this was very early stages with a blank canvas where I had the opportunity, which is rare again. Like there's a lot of people who would have had to immediately go back to work, had to find a job. I was really fortunate I didn't. I only was met with, what do you actually want to do? Let's make sure that you can go do it.
What I'm impressed is just the mindset. I mean, there are people who work their whole lives to just gain some clarity in terms of what it is they want to do, to try to sit back rather, and just, I guess, to say you were meditating, leading meditations, you were walking the walk through this whole process. I find that impressive for somebody who was going through what you were going through.
I appreciate it.
The mental fortitude is like,
I think when imagine this, right? You're 15 years old, you come home from school, your family's divided, your house is angry. You have to find things that are going to keep your sanity. At least for me, I was just like, I don't want to feel this way. What can I do to make myself feel better? And at that time, thank goodness it was work out, train, go spend time with friends, be with my girlfriend, whatever, right? Again, it changed. And yet it only made me feel worse. Those new outlets only made me feel worse. So I always kept saying, like, let me get back to what actually made me feel good and was a positive outlet. And so it started in that process. And then I wanted to keep going because I was like, I feel so much better. And so for me, coaching was an incredible opportunity to help kids believe in themselves the way that I was able to through track. Track was so simple. It was show up, do the work, get better. Track was fair, right? When life didn't feel fair, it was the fastest person, the person who runs across the line wins. It wasn't like when you're trying out for the travel soccer team.
It wasn't ambiguous.
There was no politics to it. Yeah, it wasn't like you weren't even relying on other people sometimes, right? It was an individual effort, an individual sport. If I did more, I got better. And I also was, again, fortunate in Westfield cross country and track and field is one of the best in the state of New Jersey. It's the biggest public school team. You show up with an army. The team has won the most public school state championships in state history.
You, right?
Not at all. Because of my coach. My coach was historic though, right? So I was always influenced by great coaches. And I wanted to give that self-belief back to these kids, kind of like how I was able to do it on a small scale with these guys in rehab, what have you, but even more so on the track in a way that I just knew I could connect. So I reached out to my coach and he opened up his arms and he said, come back, let's do this thing. I was a volunteer track coach, 23, 24 years old. And that first season that I was coaching, I immediately knew I was home. This was what I was meant to do. But I also was met with kind of that first real life moment of, are you sure you got this? That first season, right around Thanksgiving, my dad had a routine neck procedure. Picked him up from the hospital. He had the neck brace on. I was making fun of his neck brace. He had to literally duck out of the car to go get his medicine, whatever. And next morning, my mom walked down into the kitchen and was crying. And I was at the computer getting ready to go to track practice. I was like, what's good? What's wrong? And my dad, she said, your dad passed away last night. Turned my world upside down.
This was the day after?
Day after I picked him up from the hospital. He took too much of the medication that they gave him, and caused swelling to his brain and basically shut down his ability to breathe, whatever, and turned my world upside down. I mean, it was the first time that somebody in my life had passed away that was that close. You know, here I was getting my shit together, and really quickly life decided to throw a curveball at me where I could have, in that moment, gone back to how I always did, right? My outlets, the negative ones. And really, nobody would have blamed me, right? I always think about that. Like, nobody would have blamed me if I just said, I'm going to drink today, you know? Because nobody ever really held me accountable to any of my actions, even growing up, because they always felt like I had something to point to. My parents, the drinking, you name it. Like, there was always an excuse for my behavior. And there would have been in that moment, had I chosen to not shown up in alignment with who I wanted to be or who I knew I was capable of being. But I had my mom, and I had my little brother, and I had these kids I was coaching. So I had forces pulling on me to show up outside of myself, right? If it was left to me, I probably would have failed. But because I had other people who I said, this is how I want to show up, that I was responsible to, you know, I was able to kind of just keep going. And, you know, these 16-year-old kids were supporting me, you know, at that time, because I was in the right place, doing the right thing, walking the walk. And they had my backs, which was like, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing to think about.
Holy shit. I mean, you know, we talk about luck in life, right? How luck only comes when you're working to find it. It's almost that analogy of, you know, there's an analogy of the red car. Like, when you came over here, how many red cars did you see? And you know, most people will go, I don't know, I haven't seen any. And then when you go home, you notice nothing but red cars, right? And luck is kind of the same way. If you're not looking for it, but you have to work for it. And the fact that you work so hard to stay away from the bad elements of what you could have fallen back to and focused on the good stuff, how did that next step kind of come to play for you?
So I think an important part of this is my brother was a freshman in college. My brother and my dad were super close. If you can imagine, my mom and I are often rehab together. My brother's home with my dad, right? He's a senior in high school, a freshman in college. He had been dealing with all the same shit that I was, except even younger, and he couldn't go off to college and escape it. So
5 or 6 years younger?
Yeah, basically 6 years younger. And if you can, like, I find it almost hard to imagine the level of mental fortitude this kid had to sit in that house, to deal with that shit, and still was the happiest kid you'd ever see. Like, again, maybe on the outside, right? And dealing with it on the inside, but smiles, right? Ear to ear, always like the light of the room. So I had him where I was like, I need to show up for him. I had to pick him up from college that day, drive him home, explain what was going down. So my motive went from, let me, you know, inspire these kids on the track team who I don't have a real relationship with yet. I had to build that, to let me show my brother what's possible, even though dad's gone, right? And also let me show myself. So over the next, you know, let's call it year, I launched my Instagram account, and I did that as my first real business venture coming out of college, where I was going to coach endurance athletes around the world. I found kind of a gap in the market. This was when people were first building books of business on social media, whether that was weight loss, whether that was bodybuilding, whether that was whatever. Nobody was talking to endurance athletes. So here I was helping the kids at the track. Let me try to build a business that could help people all over. I'll document my training. I'll be really open with what I'm going through. It just kind of was how I was wired. It became, again, an outlet for me to just kind of vent and talk about what I was going through. And people really, it resonated, right? Now, mind you, my buddies from college were like, dude, what are you posting on the internet? It's you and your booty shorts running around town. We don't know this guy. And I was like, it's one of my businesses, right? So I had that. They're like, whatever, do you, because it's way better than what you were doing before. So again, support. When in reality, had I not been through that stuff and I just kind of put myself out there, who knows, like the backlash and whatever that I would get from my buddies. But because it was a good direction, they're like, go for it, bro. Like, do your thing. we got you.
It's amazing how a little support can kind of take you, miles and miles away, but a little bit of backlash, a little bit of people being critical can totally stampede on your.
It's an interesting point too, as you bring it back to what one of your goals was for this conversation. I think everyone always applauds me for going for it and putting myself out there, but I was only met with support. And I think for other people starting businesses, chances are like they're leaving their jobs, right? They're leaving a sense of security. They're doing something that's not the status quo or normal, and it's shaken up their world too. So I give other people way more credit than I give myself for starting, because they're probably met with a lot more pushback from people who care about them than I was. I was only met with support. So it was easy for me because like, what did I have to lose? I had, contextually speaking, nothing. I just said, everyone said, go. I said, cool, sounds good.
Yeah, I think people take the leap, and it's a leap of faith. And if you do not have that infrastructure around you that's at least giving you that little bit of applaud, it's tough to keep going, because you then have to fight with yourself mentally to do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And while most of us deal with doing a lot of things on our own, that little sense of encouragement is, it's a seed. It's a little bit of food, a little seed for growth.
Definitely. Yeah. So I was met with support. I launched that Instagram account. I pushed, I put my best foot out there, but I had no idea what I was doing, right? I just posted, was following people, unfollowing people who didn't follow me back, you name it. Was able to build a little bit of a following. I was coaching people from Australia to Switzerland and Mexico City to all over the US. Was getting some brand deals in the very infancy of what that looked like. But I was scared about just having an online book of business. I was like, what happens if somebody steals my Instagram account?
So
right?
What year is this?
This is 2017.
17, okay.
Yep. It was about 6 months into moving home, quite frankly. And it was February of 2017. So it was about 4 months after my dad passed away. I said, I'm going to go for this. And I still have a very graphic visual of the first post I put out there. It was me in long white compressions with like a black fitted top, running strides on the turf. And again, I posted it without having conversations with my buddies. And they're like, dude, what's going on? Like, do we need another intervention? Do we need to send you back? Like, you good? But I just went for it and I did it. And so was scared about having just an online book of business. So by that summer, I was also personal training. And I signed the lease to my first studio in Westfield, my hometown, where I was the assistant track coach. And just again, kind of just kept pushing a little bit more, but it felt safe.
So how'd you get to the point where you signed your first lease? Were you making good money online?
I was making good money online. Now when I first started, I was just begging people to let me coach them as proof of concept, right? Can I do this? Can I get you results? Slowly but surely, it went from $50 a month to $100 a month to $250 a month to at one point I was charging $500 a month and I was coaching 50 people. So do the math. Like, it was real money, right? And so I said, screw it. Like, I'm going to sign a lease to a 700 square foot studio. It was me, my dog, a squat rack in Westfield, in my hometown. Even if I lost, a tenth of my business, 20% of my business, I could still cover the rent. And it's all good. I was living home, So that first month that I signed the lease to that studio is when kind of that second moment in really my story put itself on me. And like, I don't tell these stories often because I also don't want to use them as a crutch in terms of who I am, what I'm up to now. But they are major moments in my life that have really helped define that mindset. So I think it is important to share. But signed the lease to that gym, started construction on it. It was August. And towards the back end of August, woke up one night and it was something that you see on the news and you'd never expect to happen to you. Opened up my bedroom door, was met with flames, and slammed the door shut. Had my phone under my pillow like so many of us sleep with, luckily. Went over the window, punched out the window, jumped onto the roof, looked onto the front lawn and saw my mom on the front lawn screaming for us to like get out of the house. So jumped off the roof, ran over to my mom, pushed my mom back, turned back to the house, and the house is just like engulfed in flames. And so woke up in the middle of the night. It was like 3:30 to an incredible house fire. And just a moment of shock, called the police. We live on Prospect Street. The fire department's on Prospect Street, about a mile and a half down. They get there in like 3 minutes. Neighbors were coming out at that point too. We live up in the woods pretty much. And there was like something in me where I couldn't go back in the house. There was no going back, but there was a sense of belief that maybe my brother wasn't home. And yet his car was parked there. And Jake was a college kid. I was like, okay, maybe he's at his girlfriend's, right? You're rationalizing what could be. And after about 30 minutes, they came back out and they, Jake had passed away in the fire. So that whole, the moment of why, right? Asking like, what's the point of all of this? What, like, why? Everything else is muted, and you kind of just go back into your shell, and you just kind of just, it was we did the service on my 25th birthday. Jake would have been a sophomore in college, and it was 9 months after my dad had passed away. And that whole sense of purpose, right? Show up for your brother, was out the window, and you're just kind of left with the question of like, what's the point of all this? That like, does it really matter? Everything that matters to you can be ripped away in a moment.
How was your mom holding up at this point?
I mean, we were both broken. I really can't even contextualize how strong my mom is, right? I mean, she's an absolute warrior, but the level of hurt and heartbrokenness that a parent feels in losing a kid, like especially in that type of way, that, really that like late in life for him, about to be 20 years old, I'll never fathom I'll never even try to understand what my mom deals with. But you as an individual, as a man, whatever, you deal with a lot of like, I could have, should have, would have, could have saved him, all that stuff, right? That was the hardest year of my life by far. But again, in a moment where I could have gone back and just said, screw it, whatever, I didn't, and I just, the question that became was what would make my dad and my brother proud. A lot of the kids that I was coaching at that time were friends with Jake, knew Jake, right? He just graduated. He was on the track team. My coach knew him. My clients became family really quickly. We had 1,000 people show up at his services at our church, where he was like the smiley kid that was always running around. So those two moments, right? Like losing somebody you love, obviously, but like losing a brother, you just start to live life a little bit differently if you choose to, right?
How did you anchor yourself? Like what was your mindset at that point? Like how did you not turn back?
You just start to, you make the decision, right? But it's like a daily decision. It's almost like how they say
it's not as simple as that.
No, it's a daily decision. And some days I lost that battle, right? Not to say I went back and drank or whatever, but I would wake up and some days I'd win and I'd say, I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to coach. I'm going to whatever. And then other days I'd lose and I'd be on the couch. And it was a battle for probably the year. But I did have things to lean into. I had my coaching. I had my business, right? I was able to pour myself into those, my clients, my mom, and then my training. And training has always been that outlet for me when I'm angry, when I'm sad.
That anger again.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I committed to doing my first, and it's so cliche as I actually think about it, but I committed to doing my first Ironman, right? Half Ironman that summer on the anniversary of Jake passing away. And I trained like a madman, as you can imagine, trained like a madman, didn't know how to swim, had to take swim lessons, didn't know how to bike. I still probably have scars on my knees from falling over so much. One of my only skill sets in life is the ability to run in a straight line for an extended period of time. So I had that one down. Went up to Maine with my mom at the end of August and did that race, crushed it, absolutely dominated. To the point that I'm like on the bike looking at the guys next to me and I'm like, how amazing is this? We're in such incredible shape. And they're like, dude, shut up. Like we're like 50 miles into a bike ride right now. I can't feel my leg. And I'm just like, this is amazing. But it did. And there's amazing pictures and I'll have to send them to you of me finishing that race, feeling like Jake was with me and feeling like this weight was lifted off my shoulder where I gave myself permission to live life again, like actually live it. Because I think when you're living life out of like anger and frustration and all of this stuff, you're not really feeling it. You're just numb and you're moving. And I think there's a major difference between feeling life. And again, now I'm 6 years beyond that. I'm definitely feeling it way more than I was. But I was kind of just numb and just moving forward and like doing and achieving and winning, whatever, for the sake of doing it, versus feeling all that there is to feel in life, whether it's, love and actual happiness and, feeling success for the right reasons rather than just the material or what have you. Like, I finally felt like in that moment, I could give myself permission to just go live my life.
So outside of that self-prescribed, going to go and focus on running and working out, and what else do you like? What has been your, I don't know if I want to say process, or what have you kind of looked to give you guidance? I mean, a lot of these things you're making it sound like it's all this, this gut intuition. Has it all been gut intuition? Have you looked to, to other things to help you get through what you've been through and to help guide you in business, or what has been?
I mean, initially, I'll be really honest in the sense of that it definitely wasn't like an immediate flip of the switch. And, I kind of just kept pushing forward, but also just enjoying the fact that I got to do what I, was getting to do. Right. It wasn't until way down the road that I started allowing myself to go to therapy, have those hard conversations, start like dating again, right? Like all of the things that are like actual part of life rather than just like work, business, training. It took me a long time to like lean into that stuff because I was just a brick wall. It was way easier to not feel anything than it was to open up Pandora's box to everything that I had to work through and process. So eventually I gave myself permission to really do the work and lean in on those harder moments and conversations and the resentment that I held towards myself. But it wasn't until I felt like I was in a place where I probably wanted to and needed to, a little bit of a mixed bag there.
So how much did you find yourself pouring yourself back into work? You had mentioned, was that something that took your time for a period where you weren't looking at anything other than what you had in front of you?
Work was my everything, realistically. So fast forward from there, after that initial year, opened up my second gym. It was called Alpha Performance Studio in Garwood. Started doing semi-private classes, started doing youth training, started tinkering with the group concept, which later became Alpha Fit Club. So work was everything. I was the youngest head track coach in the state of New Jersey at Staines, Joe's, and Metuchen. I kept going with the online coaching. Like it was just more. But I loved it too. Like I have to say, like as much as I was pouring myself into it, I was amazed by the response to it because people resonated with the mindset, right? The idea of ownership, the idea of responsibility, the idea of you get to be here doing this and not everybody does, right? And so for the right people, this it just attracted them, right? It brought them in, and then I cared a tremendous amount. I still care very much about the outcome that people are striving for, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. I always used to say training was what people trusted me with, right? So it was my excuse to infiltrate your life and actually help you with what you were dealing with. So it was kind of a scapegoat where, yes, I was personal trainer and coach, but I also was able to dive deep and get to the core of like, what are you actually dealing with and how can I help you?
So you were good at it and you loved it.
Yes.
And you still are good at it. It's not a was. So Alpha Fit, talk to me a little bit. Let's get to the second part, after that emotional beginning half of, I'm sure we've got listeners' ears, they're probably sitting at the edge of their seats. But, we take a little bit of a pivot and just talk about where you are today.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting that you've taken a single gym with your squat bench and your online Instagram with your booty shorts and your compression pants.
Still got them. Got the quads out.
And now you're opening up your 13th location in Jersey City.
Yep.
The 12th is opening
Belmar
tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you've created a franchise model.
Yep.
And you have how many franchisees? Talk to me a little bit about, let's kind of go back a little bit to model and how it's developed so far.
So rewind the clock, 2019, April 27th, we opened our first Alpha Fit Club in Westfield, New Jersey. It used to be the old Westfield farm building on Central Avenue. Was on a run one day, saw it, said, let's make this what we think it can be. Group fitness was blowing up at the time. So all of my buddies were in New York City. They were doing boutique group fitness. I didn't really understand it. I was more of a hat down, headphones in, go to work, do my thing. Again, kind of like, my outlet. So I didn't really want to talk with nobody as I did it. But it was blowing up, and I went to an Orange Theory class, started to get an understanding, went to F45 in the city, started to really get an understanding, started negotiating with F45 in Australia about opening up locations here in Westfield. Somebody already beat me to the territory. So two of my clients at the time were the ones that kind of really were pushing me. And they were like, listen, man, you're meant for more than just this small little box with your dog, right? They're like, we love it. We're happy to come, but like, you're meant for more. And so I ended up partnering with them and a group, and we went out and signed that first lease in Westfield. I was our first general contractor. You can imagine the amount of things that we're still clearing up in that initial space. But we built what we thought was missing in the group fitness area, which was a New York City inspired boutique fitness experience brought to the suburbs. There was nothing that was sexy and clean and also had training principles behind it, right? There wasn't that. There was the amazing like mom and pop communities. There was those kind of bigger box or bigger brand kind of vanilla experiences in my experience of them.
Well, then you had the rugged CrossFit.
Totally. So there just wasn't this like cool, sexy, well done group fitness concept in the suburbs. So we opened the first one in Westfield, and we had a running head start. I could plug and play my clients that I was training semi-privately. I was, the track coach at Westfield, so I knew 300 kids with 600 parents. I grew up there, my mom grew up there, my grandparents grew up there. My grandparents were high school sweethearts at Westfield. So like the running joke is the town can't get rid of us, which is totally fine. There's worse places to be, quote unquote, stuck. And it allowed us to really open up with some juice. And so within the first 9 months there, we had about 400 members, which was amazing. It's kind of like the cool spot to go to, which had problems and caused its own set of problems. But 9 months in, the pandemic hits. And so 9 months into our first Alpha Fit Club, pandemic happens. So this is like the next gut punch for me. For me, though, I was just like, all right, cool. Well, what's next? How do we solve this? Because again, when you think about the other problems that I had in my life, I'm like,
worse,
who cares?
Man. Yeah, this is just.
I put every dollar I had into this thing and then some. And, the rug got ripped out from us. But I was just like, well, we're still here. We're all good. Like, this is fine. So what's next? I would bring a boombox downtown with a whiteboard over my head and lead a workout on Quimby Street for 150 people. Like, I just said, like, what are we going to do and how do we move forward? And I just kept showing up. And I think most people were pulling back and retreating. But I was like, if the worst thing that happens here is the gym doesn't reopen, so fucking what? Who cares? Like, let's just go. And so we really probably took that mindset to the extreme in that we signed our second and third leases for Verona and Red Bank during the pandemic, opened up in Verona with masks on. I have so many funny pictures of like me with like a dog collar on, blocking my face from everybody. And I have like a selfie where I'm like, this shit doesn't work. Red Bank, we got to open the day that masks got to come off. So it was like a party down there.
I'm sure you got amazing lease negotiated.
Any lease that we signed during the pandemic was incredible, right? And definitely allowed us to do what we did initially. But we were also one of the only gyms that was pushing forward and saying like, we're going to keep going. So people were craving community. People were craving connection. And we're like, we have something here. So let's go for it. And the product itself was awesome, right? Like you walked in and it was a blacked out room, wolf mural on the wall. Your boy got tatted over here with the wolf at some point because I was like, I'm all in. If you're all in, I'm all in. So we just went for it. And we now, those are our three kind of corporate studios. We wanted the franchise from the jump, right? So you asked the question about what made us franchise.
Now, the two investors that you had coming in, they were clients of yours, but what was their background?
So Jerry, who's actually the franchisor of Salad House as well, he was in private equity prior to that. Made a life decision to transition out of that, bought into the Salad House franchise. So he started to get a behind the scenes look of what franchising looked like. And we've been able to learn from their experience. They have about 15 locations open now around the state. And then Rob was a CFO. So you had the financial background, which I certainly didn't have, but I was the light, I was the energy, I was the fitness mind in the room. And that also gave me a lot of trust from them to go do my thing, which again, here you are met with a tremendous amount of support saying like, you've got this, go figure it out. Like it's your energy that we're looking for. And I'm so, incredibly grateful that I was given the leash to go, the rope to go do my thing. And we learned a tremendous amount, right? Like we have, and we continue to, but the ambition was, can we build this to scale? Can we build this to replicate from the jump? And that was everything from the workout to the equipment, to the floor plan, to the branding, right? So it was designed to be franchised from the jump. Now, I will say, opening up franchise number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 within a 5-month window, we were not ready to franchise, at least not as much as we thought. But we've been able to take a step back every single opening and say, how do we do this better? How do we make this more efficient? How do we create a better partnership with our franchisees? You now have two sets of customers, the people who come in and take class every day at the gym and the people who actually buy a franchise and say, we want to represent this brand and build a profitable business on the backside of that.
So your newest locations are all
Yes.
franchisees that are
Yes.
opening up their own location.
Correct.
Do you have any anticipation of going and opening any more corporate stores to start?
If the
in
right
any
opportunities
regions,
present
or-
themselves. So an example that I'll give you is I am actually a part of the franchise group in both Belmar and Jersey City. Those were locations, Jersey City specifically, where somebody came knocking on our door. They were interested in Jersey City. Jersey City is as close as we'll get to New York City. And from a branding perspective, and also our first urban setting in comparison to the rest, I felt like we were not ready to let somebody else take that baton and run with it. So we said, you can open the franchise or we can open the franchise, but we're going to be a part of this with you. So it was an interesting, opportunity there where in certain instances, maybe in major markets or what have you, we will create certain partnerships or what have you. And I would never say never to us opening more corporate studios as well.
So what I think is interesting, because when we talk about successful businesses who are launching off the ground and going into stratosphere status, there's always that dynamic of the visionary, the person who has the foresight, the ideas, what it's going to look like, and then there's the person that always kind of keeps them back and grounded and is maybe a little bit more like a chief operating officer. The fact that you got that right off the bat is spectacular. Now, where do you guys want to take this moving forward?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is I'm probably very much the one in our group who is slow or stalls growth, because I also understand the infrastructure and the support that's needed for these franchise partners to succeed.
Because you're the boots on the ground.
I get it. I've been there. I've done that. I know what it takes to build the team. I know what it takes to launch the studio, the construction, you name it. I've had my hands in every single facet. So when we're ready, which I feel like is right now actually, to press play on rapid growth, that's really been predicated on our ability to support franchise partners, right? Before opening one franchise, we sold 20. So we sold out the state of New Jersey for the most part in all of the A markets that we wanted to members, coaches, you name it, people who were in the building, knew us, saw how we moved, saw how we operated, and said, I want to be a part of this. Not just because I've seen what the brand can do for people, not just because we, whatever, but because we see how you're moving, we see what you're creating. We want to kind of take this outside of where it already is. So that was, again, a kind of a vote of confidence for us as well, and also kept it close to the family. We knew that the brand would be represented the right way and we could take over the state, which slowly but surely I think we're doing. What I'm hoping happens in this next phase is we need to go outside the state and find other pockets of Fairfield County, Connecticut, right, where we went to college, Westchester County, Long Island, Philadelphia. Like, we just are signing Philadelphia right now, which will be our first major city that we take on, but we feel like we're ready for it and we feel like we can support the growth. So a lot of different levers in place to make sure that that's possible, whether that's from a team perspective, a partner perspective, in terms of who we're selling the franchises to. The two gentlemen who are going to do Philadelphia are studs in terms of fitness operators. That makes it way easier for me to say yes, right? So I think those are the questions that we're now asking ourselves. And it's just a matter of strategic growth that we can actually support and starting to blow this up in the Northeast and wherever else the right people come to us.
Well, this is great, man. I think as this thing starts to continue its path, I'd love to have you on again just to give us some sort of an update before we leave, because I want to be respectful of your time. I do want to get one thing from you before we part, and that is for people who are going through a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
And they're, everyone, like I said, everyone always has their own cross to bear, but everyone struggles with things differently. What are maybe 3 tidbits of advice that you would give to people to say, as a way for them to think about their own personal situations and moving forward?
Sure. So I'm really only going to give advice that, again, I would follow myself and that I find myself following, because it's not to say that I sit here with a perfect life. There's many things that come up for all of us, regardless of if it's major trauma or minor trauma, right?
But what have you learned? Exactly.
Yeah. So writing it out, I think, is key. For me, journaling has been a game changer. Getting the thoughts out of my head onto paper. And what typically happens is this. I start with venting, right? It's always complaining. I work through it. And then by the end, I'm hyping myself up. It's just the way that it goes. But I think getting out on paper what's bugging you, what's bothering you, how you actually feel about it, and like really getting raw and honest. And then by the end of it, chances are like you're not still complaining. You're finally being like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do about it. This is how I'm going to show up. So I think first bit of advice is write it out, right? Period. Second bit, and I would say this does probably come after the fact, is if you can find one person in your life that you can go to who, I'm not even going to say they're going to push back on you, but they're just going to listen. Like find that one person and have that conversation, because the second that you get it out of just your own world and you get it to somebody else, you're going to feel 50 pounds lighter.
Now, is that somebody close that you can trust, or is that somebody who has one degree of separation and you don't feel will have any vested interest, but you can be honest with?
For me, it's going to be somebody I'm close with. I mean, I would hope that we all have one person that we can go to. And if you don't, then find the alternative, right? But for me, I think if I'm going to disclose something to somebody, I want them to have some sort of connection, right? I want that. That's just how I would roll with it. And again, who am I to give you this advice, right? I'm just giving you what I would do, right? This is my process. And then really from there, I would say the last bit is, asking yourself, what are you going to do to solve for it, right? Because it's one thing to vent about it. It's another thing to work through it a little bit on paper. It's another thing to talk to you about it, whatever. There's an action on the other side of it where you say, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And I have to make an adjustment in my life. What is that adjustment, right? What is that action on the other side of it that's going to get you through it? There's some saying, and I'm going to butcher it, right? Where it's like, pushing through that discomfort, right? On the other side of that is that freedom, right? And I think a lot of us are looking for the freedom of that weight on our shoulders about the thing that we don't want to go do, or the conversation we don't want to have. How much better do you feel ripping the Band-Aid and having the conversation with the person you need to? Every time it's better, right? It might be really painful in that moment, but every time it's better.
Now, how do you hold yourself accountable?
I don't know. I mean, listen, there's plenty of conversations I should be having right now as I sit here with you, whether it's with business partners, my girlfriend, my mom, whoever, right? Like, I am not the perfect person at this. I'm just giving advice that I probably should listen to myself. Again, it's way easier to be a coach and tell other people to go do this shit than do it yourself. So I think for me, it's I probably will leave here and have to make a couple calls myself.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming by. I think it's an amazing story. I'm glad to see you sitting with me, and I'm glad to see that you chose the right path, and you're an amazing guy. And how do people find you?
I mean, my life is still on Instagram, coach.samtooley. I tried getting rid of the coach so that I could just be Sam Tooley.
Could we still find those booty short pictures?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
God,
man.
I can't wait.
They're out there.
I'm gonna post them all over Westfield, all over Basking Ridge.
People will be like, "Dude, we've seen this. Next, who's the next guy?" So yeah, just on IG, probably the best.
Perfect. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Thank you so much.